Welcome to This Explainer. Let's talk about something literally all of us have felt at some point: the absolute crushing weight of financial anxiety. You know, that heavy, sinking feeling in your chest when the bills keep stacking up and the resources just don't seem to match the responsibilities? It is such a deeply human experience. Well, today, we're unpacking a really fascinating text that proposes a complete, radical solution to this universal panic. The material we're diving into introduces this incredible central thesis of invisible provision. Basically, it suggests that while you might be staring right now at what looks like a totally empty table, there is actually a feast being prepared for you from the other side. We're going to break down this entire paradigm shift, moving away from a mindset of absolute scarcity and into one of divine, unseen provision. The text starts by empathizing with a reality we know all too well. We can call it calculator math. It's honestly a lot like trying to budget for a toddler's constantly changing appetite. It's infuriating, totally unpredictable, and mathematically impossible. You know the exact moment I'm talking about. It usually hits you when you're doing something totally ordinary, like driving or doing the dishes, and suddenly the numbers just land on your chest like a stone. You run the calculations in your head 100 times, right? And it always ends with that knot in your stomach, a perceived permanent deficit, and that absolutely terrifying question: how is this going to work? The author completely acknowledges this quiet desperation, but argues that this human math is actually entirely the wrong framework for understanding our true reality. So let's jump right into the first big concept, the lens of scarcity, and how our perception fights our reality. There is a massive, stark contrast here. On one side, we've got human math. This is the realm of spreadsheets, strict limitations, and constant agonizing deficits. The core philosophy here argues that looking at life through this lens of scarcity totally distorts our reality. It makes small blessings look completely insufficient. It literally makes a table that is actively being set look like it's been abandoned. But then there's the alternative: divine math. The narrative draws on ancient stories like the widow who just poured out what little oil she had, and it magically multiplied way beyond what her containers could even hold. This system operates on an unseen supply and absolutely limitless resources that don't ration out help or hoard reserves for a rainy day. And that brings us to this absolutely crucial theological premise from the text. What you need has already been named. The whole idea here is that your supply is actively being calibrated behind the scenes, way before a shortage even pops up in your daily life. Just because you can't hold a solution in your hands right this very second doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means the timing is being calibrated with a level of precision that our anxious, panicking brains simply can't comprehend in the heat of the moment. The provision was already in motion before the bill even arrived in your mailbox. Okay, moving on to the next piece of the puzzle: dismantling the shame and fear that hold us back. So, you might be wondering, if provision is already on its way, why on earth do we struggle so much to actually experience it? Well, the text makes a remarkably comforting assertion here that challenges how society typically views wealth. It emphatically states that financial lack is never a punishment, period. It's not evidence of divine displeasure, and it's definitely not some penalty for something you did wrong 10 years ago. But most importantly, financial pressure is absolutely not a reflection of your inherent value. The text insists that the poorest person is just as profoundly valued as the richest, because value is measured by identity, not by your bank account. So I want you to actually pause for a second and think about this. If lack isn't a punishment and help really is available, why do we actively block the very help we need? Why are we so fiercely, almost stubbornly self-reliant? The author digs into some truly fascinating psychological insights about our inner world here, specifically focusing on the past wounds that force us to keep our guard up. Let's look at this concept of the armor of childhood vows. The philosophy suggests that the real, deep-down issue beneath our financial worry is actually a primal terror of insufficiency. A lot of the time, this traces all the way back to a moment in childhood when we saw stability just crumble. We learned the hard way that resources could run out and that safety just wasn't guaranteed. So what did we do? We made a vow to never, ever be vulnerable again. We built this incredibly thick armor of complete self-sufficiency. But here is the profound catch. While that armor absolutely protected you as a kid and kept you functioning, it's now the very wall that blocks provision from reaching you today. It literally blocks your ability to surrender and just receive. All right, let's transition into the third section and look at the invisible choreography at work. So if we can manage to lower that armor, what actually happens? We start to notice what the text calls invisible choreography. And this is one of my favorite ideas in the whole piece. Protection is provision. Think about those closed doors you knocked on until your knuckles literally bled. The lost deals, the rejected job applications. We almost always view those as rejections of our worth, right? But the text brilliantly reframes them as divine redirection. They are protection from hidden traps, toxic partnerships, or commitments that would have totally drained you. By shielding you from a disastrous decision, that closed door wasn't an obstruction at all. It was actually a form of unseen supply. And notice how our inventory of provisions suddenly expands beyond just dollars and cents. We usually only count the cash, but what about the invisible provisions? The text points out things like health, which allowed you to actually keep working when your income was low, or shelter. Somehow, a roof remained over your head despite late payments. What about relationships, friends and family who fed your soul when your pantry literally couldn't feed your body? And wisdom, the wisdom that prevented you from making disastrous, desperate decisions. These are unrecognized, uncelebrated provisions that have sustained you with the exact same reliability as a padded bank account. The author also tackles the timeline of preparation, which answers the painful question of why seasons of lack happen in the first place. Just like agricultural fields have to lie fallow before a really rich harvest, seasons of pressure prepare the soil of your life. The roots of discipline and empathy spread deeper. Your internal foundation is massively reinforced. Why? Because abundance without depth is incredibly dangerous. Wealth without wisdom is a complete trap. These lean seasons are basically building your character and internal capacity so that when abundance does safely arrive, it blesses you instead of destroying you. Let's pivot now to see how this all builds into actionable steps. Section 4, the posture of receptivity. Shifting our mindset requires a very specific posture, and the text introduces this great term, active rest. This is absolutely crucial to understand. Active rest is not passive denial. It doesn't mean sticking your head in the sand, ignoring reality, or pretending your bills don't exist. Instead, it's defined as the highest form of confidence, demonstrated right smack in the middle of a need. It's looking squarely at the terrifying, hardcore evidence of your current circumstances, like a low bank balance or past due notices, and actively choosing to believe that the provider is more reliable than the problem. Think about the sheer physical difference between these two mindsets. Desperation is like praying with clenched fists, using intense volume, essentially begging what feels like a reluctant supplier or a really strict landlord. It is exhausting. But expectation, that's completely different. That's a posture of open hands facing upward. You aren't begging, you are just confirming an order that has already been placed. It's a quiet, totally settled confidence. The whole premise here is that provision requires empty palms. You can't receive anything if your hands are so busy gripping the problem that they have literally no room left to take the gift. Another really critical point here is understanding the difference between provision and abundance. Provision is your daily bread. It's that relentless, steady sustenance that just keeps you functioning day to day. Sure, it might not be glamorous, but man, it is dependable. Abundance, on the other hand, is the tangible overflow, and that is meant specifically for sharing with others. The text issues a really strong warning here. Despising the daily provision just because it isn't a massive feast yet actually delays the abundance. Having gratitude for that small daily bread is the exact key that unlocks the door to the larger overflow. So how do we practically make this shift in our inner world? The author gives us a roadmap. First off, change your vocabulary. Flat out refuse the language of defeat and start speaking words of expectation. Second, offer raw, totally unedited honesty. The provider can easily handle your anger and your fear, but cannot work with your distance. Third, start viewing strangers differently, not just as passing transactions, but as potential, real-life human carriers of divine provision. And finally, make the provider the architect of your financial structure right from the start. Don't just use them as a frantic emergency backup plan when your own spreadsheet finally fails. As we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative question that really just encapsulates this entire paradigm shift. Take a close look at your life right now, your current challenges and your resources. Are you just staring at an empty table, counting only what is visibly missing? Or are you willing to recognize the invisible feast, the unseen choreography, and the quiet, brilliant preparation that's happening right now, just behind the curtain? The choice of how you view your reality might just be the exact key to changing it.